So continuing from where we were, talking about how the work of an artist is to bring out that which is holy within him, to sanctify himself and bring this out, but only the good, and not the, because there are things within us that we can make tahor or we can make tamei, right? And it's the artist's job to bring out only those things that are tahor. By the way, there is a Jewish novelist who was also a conservative rabbi who grew up in a Hasidic family, all right, who almost all of his books, by the way, justify the decision that he made not to be firm, all right? In one of his books is about a Hasidic boy who becomes an artist and ends up painting crucifixions, right? Crucifixion is not such a good thing, right? This is, by the way, exactly what Rav Kook was talking about not bringing out the tamei aspects, right? And in that novel, there is a point where this Hasidic boy's, let's call him Rebbe in art, says, an artist is only concerned with himself, he cares nothing about anything else in the world, all right? He just has to express what's in him, and it doesn't matter what damage he does to his family and relatives and so on. All right, that is an introduction to this parak, which is ahava atzma'it bein musar l'kedusha, self-love, and the difference between musar and kedusha. Musar, by the way, is generally translated as ethics into English, but that is not a good translation. I do not believe that there is any English word that translates it well. All right, we'll discuss this in a little bit. Self-love is a natural feeling that a person has, and every natural thing that a person was created with, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created that because it was a necessary part of humankind, right? There's the famous Gemara that the Chachamim prayed to get rid of the Yetzer Hara for sexual matters, right? And there were no eggs laid that year, there were no children born that year, and it goes through a list of things, and it turns out not so good. We need it, right? Mankind needs such a thing. You can't exist without it.
You should wear tzitzis.
What?
You should wear tzitzis.
Yeah, there are all sorts of things. But so there is a necessity for self-love, putting one's own needs in a certain position, right? But exactly where it is. Now, there are two ways, Rav Kook says, in Musar HaKodesh, that a person can elevate themselves. One is through Musar and one is through Kedusha, and they're different. Musar, one of the things the Radak wrote was something called Sefer HaSharashim, which is one of the earliest dictionaries of the Hebrew language. And he relates different roots to each other. And he relates Musar to Yisurim, which is sufferings, right? But he also relates it to Mosros, ropes. Right? That Musar makes a person think about their actions and not do everything they necessarily want to do, right?
Say subjugated
And it makes you sometimes feel guilty about things that you did, right? That let's admit it, often we as normal human beings do things that we know we shouldn't do, right? But we do it anyway, right? Should I be doing this? No. But,
Never.
What?
I'm adjusting my killer.
The way of Musar has a great advantages to it, but it also has problems associated with it, right? Because if you limit yourself and restrict yourself too much, a person can get very depressed, right? I've never done, I could have done this better, I could have done this better. There are many people that don't achieve anything, right? Because they're so concerned about whether this is right or that is right.
I mean, isn't that similar to should a person be an ascetic?
Yeah.
Because you're missing out on.
For certain people, being an ascetic is very good. Depends upon the person. It doesn't work for everyone. The other thing that Rav Kook talks about is the Kedusha Elyona. Kedusha is very different in the way it works. Rav Kook says as opposed to Musar, which does limit one's self-love.
By the way, when you say Musar, is that the same as Musar?
Yes. I sometimes use an Israeli pronunciation, sometimes a Yiddish pronunciation.
No, because Musar has a very different connotation than everything you've been talking about up until now. When somebody tells me they're giving Musar or getting Musar or giving me Musar, there is a connotation of you're telling me what I need to be doing.
Yeah, but let's call it the Yiddish term Musar includes what Rav Kook would call Kedusha Elyona in it to a certain degree.
So you're saying, even though it's the same word just pronounced differently, in essence, it's almost like it has a different meaning.
That's often true, by the way, when you go from Yiddish to Hebrew with the Hebrew word.
Even if somebody says to me Shabbat Shalom versus Good Shabbos, you would think it's the same thing, but it's really not.
It's not. By the way, I know he's passed away, but I knew an older Rav he was Israeli. He grew up in the Chevron Yeshiva, learned there for a long, long time before he learned at Merkaz Rav. But when he davened, it was in modern Israeli Hebrew, except for the word Shabbos.
It's interesting because a lot of times you'll see when it comes to Shem Hashem, they'll pronounce it with an oi instead of I.
Uh-huh.
Just for
Right.
Hashem's sake.
Yeah. Yes. That's all. Anyway, there's a difference between it. So Rav Kook in Musar HaKodesh says, "Hakdusha einet nilchemes klal neged ahava hatzmei." That sanctity does not fight at all with self-love. All right, as opposed to Musar, which can sometimes tell you you're not supposed to do this, right? You should feel bad if you do this, whatever. Hatvua ba'amuk b'mamkei nefesh kol chai. That is very deep in the soul of every living thing. Ela shehi mamida es ha'adam b'tzura elyona kazos. But it brings it stands a person up on a very high level. Shekol ma sheyoter yeh ohev et atzmo. And all the more that it elevates a person, it causes him to love himself. Kacha yitpashet hatov shebo al hakol. Thus, it spreads over everything. Al kol hasviva, over his entire surroundings. Al kol ha'olam, on the entire world. Al kol havaya, on all of one's experience and existence. These two things, Musar and Kedusha, have to be used by a person to elevate themselves, and how much of one or the other a person needs, to a large extent, depends upon that person, right? There's no one prescription that works for everyone, right? And no matter what you do, you cannot entirely negate yourself and be constructive at all. Spiritually, physically, anything. It's to go too far in one direction, right, is almost always wrong.
Rambam.
Right, the golden mean. It wasn't around. All the medieval philosophers had this idea, because you have to keep
Stability is a good thing.
Yes. Ma'ayin bata v'la'anata holech. Where did you come from? Where are you going? There is all the Mishnayos and Pirkei Avos are fairly well known, I would say, right? Much more than most other Mishnayos. In Mishnayos, people, there is a minhag to read them at least once a year, and so on. So they're fairly well known. So there's a Mishnah that says, beginning of Perek Gimel, Akavia ben Mahalal al-Omer. Akavia ben Mahalal says, Histakel b'shlosha devarim, look in three things. V'yatab lidei avera, and you won't come to sin. Da me'ayin bata, know where you came from. V'la'anata holech, where you're going. V'lifnei mi'ata atid l'teitin v'cheshbon, and in front of whom you're going to give an account. Right? Din v'cheshbon has become a Roshei Tevos in modern Hebrew, right? Duach. Many people don't even know what it means anymore, right? Right. Yeah, no. Ma'ayin bata, where did you come from? Mitipa srucha, from a rotten drop. V'la'anata holech, where are you going? L'makar afar rima v'toleya, to a place of dirt, dust, and worms and creepy crawlers. V'lifnei mi'ata atid l'tein din v'cheshbon, who are you going to give an account for? Lifnei melech malchei malachim hakadosh baruch hu, for the Holy One. Right? Now, when you look at it on its face, it's one whole piece. However, Shmuel de Ozida wrote, most people have never heard that name, but there is at least among certain sectors that learn Pirkei Avos Be'iyun, there is a commentary on Pirkei Avos known as the Midrash Shmuel. It's a very deep commentary on Pirkei Avos. He says there are two parts of this Mishnah that are different. All right? He says, Da me'ayin bata v'la'anata holech l'ifnei mi'atid. What does this mean? Da me'ayin bata, where do you know where you're coming from? Da shechatzavta nishmatcha mitachat kisei hakavod. Know that your neshama comes from under the throne of the Holy of Holies. Right? There's a famous midrash like that. Right? And it is a portion of God. Right? The Jewish neshama is a part of God. When you look at this, right? How can I destroy my neshama by doing things that aren't good for it? Right? Like it, so to speak, I'm destroying part of God. Can't do that. La'anata holech, where are you going? The neshama is going to go back to the place where it was carved out of, under the throne of God's glory, right? So, if I manage to mess up the neshama in this world, right?
It's not going to fit back.
It's not going to fit back where it goes. How can you do such a thing? Lifnei mi'ata l'teitin v'cheshbon. Your neshama in the future has to give an account of itself, right? You have to be careful to make sure that it doesn't sin. Then he goes, the Midrash Shmuel says, there's another, this is one aspect of looking at the world, which Rav Kook would call the way of Kedusha, right? The way of sanctification. This is another way of looking at it, right? He goes afterwards, right? Where do you come from? This is the Musar of Navardik. Where do you come from? A rotten drop, right? You're not worth anything. Where are you going to? Dust, worms, creepy crawly bugs, right? And you're going to have to give a din v'cheshbon for all of this in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These two ways of looking at it, right, are both found in Tehillim, in the same parak of Tehillim, in 4 consecutive psukim. Ki erei shemecha masei etzbosecha. When I see your deeds, your name, the work of your hands, Yerech v'kochavim asher konanta, the moon and the stars that you established, put in place. Ma enosh ki tiskerenu. What is man that you should mention him? Uven adam ki tifkadehu. And the son of man that you should remember. By the way, the second half of this pasuk should be familiar to you from what? Right. Right? It's right there. This is one way of looking. What am I? Right? This is the second half of the Mishnah according to the Midrash Shmuel. Then the next 2 pasukim, v'tachasrehu me'at melokim. You're a little less than God. If your neshama is part of God, right? You're only a little bit lower than Him. V'kavod hadar ta'atrehu, right? And honor and grandeur you will crown Him with. Tamshilehu b'masei yedecha, kol shata tachat raglav, right? The work of your hands, right, is compared to what's under his feet. Meaning this, by the way, this is, if you wanted to say it, the derech musar of Slobodka, right? There's katnus adam, how small a man is, how nothing a man is, right? And there's gadlus adam, how great a man is. And these are the 2 things, again, that Rav Kook is talking about as the level of Kedusha and the level of Musar, right? And the way of looking at it. Musar v'Kedusha b'tzibur. Now,
That's interesting.
although self-limiting oneself, each person has to have both of these things within them, depending on the person, different amounts of different things, right? Some people need to build themselves up more, some other people have to constrain themselves more. It's all, and no one can tell you the answer to what you need, right? This is something that a person has to look inside themselves and be honest with. And that's a hard thing to do. But all of this is only when we're talking about an individual person. However, when we're talking about the community, a nation, a religion, Rav Kook says in Arat HaKodesh, Ein b'techuna shel kibbutz tziburi b'shum ofen, typo again, efsharut l'netiya shel halchashat hava ha'atzmait. There is no possibility, in no way, an ability to turn toward weakening the self-love. The community has to love itself, has to view itself in a different way. It has to bring itself up. Vaf einenu ba mimenu ki im hirus musari im yizdamen it will only